So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Asphalion's webinar, RIM implementation in times of IDMP. Before starting, just a couple of things to take into consideration about this webinar. It will last approximately 45 minutes. In case you have any questions, please submit them in the chat. There will be some minutes to answer them at the end of the webinar, and we will send you the presentation after the webinar. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Lourdes Martin, Regulatory Information Specialist at Asphalion from the Data Management Unit. Lourdes is a biologist by training, and after an extensive period where she devoted to research and development on genetics and neuroscience, she then started her career in the pharmaceutical industry in the regulatory affairs and regulatory information areas. In today's webinar, we will navigate through the current IDMP uncertainties, the most common worries about a RIM system implementation, and how, indeed, a RIM can support your journey towards IDMP now and with future releases. So now Lourdes will take it from here. Lourdes, please, whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lydia. So welcome, everyone. Many of you already know us, so thank you for joining us in one of our webinars one more time. And we hope to keep seeing you here and sharing your doubts and your thoughts. I will be moving now to the agenda so we can see what we'll be talking about today. So first of all, for those of you who don't know us yet, I will be giving a short introduction on who we are. And as we are here as well to talk about implementation of RIM system during the time of ISO IDMP, then we must at least cover some of the basics on ISO IDMP and how, in terms of the implementation of a RIM system, you can prepare and be ready for ISO IDMP compliance. And of course, we for that need to speak a little bit on the RIM systems and cover briefly what a RIM system is and give an overall view of the implementation steps in relation to the data migration. And as well, we will review the most common questions or most common issues that we have faced or seen with different sizes of companies that have been implementing a RIM system, and what are the different RIM scenarios and what complexity that brings. So to start with, on Asphalion and who we are. We are an international scientific and regulatory affairs consultancy. We have over 20 years experience and over 150 team members. We have worked with over 900 clients in more than 4,000 projects and in more than 50 countries around the world. We currently have offices in Barcelona, in Madrid, in Munich, and in London. Little bit of what we do is that we have services that involve drugs, generics, biologics, biosimilar medical devices, orphan drugs, and ATMPs. We offer services on regulatory and scientific strategy, in medical and scientific writing, global submissions, e-submissions, life cycle, and for pharmacovigilance, as well as for data management. So I will focus now here, which is the unit that I belong to. So for the data management, we have a comprehensive support for data compliance for human, for veterinary medicine, and for medical devices. And all of them revolving around RIM services and RIM implementation. But if we see the services that we offer and what we work with, so we work with UDMED and UDI, UPD, with services for data maintenance in XDMPD and SPOR. We work with project management along those lines as well, especially for ISO IDMP transition and for the implementation of RIM systems. So moving a little bit more into the implementation of RIM systems. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my mouse. I think now you can see my cursor better. So if we talk about the services that we offer along the RIM implementation, we do this as a core for compliance and data governance. We have supported implementation in over 10 companies and with a different range of products and portfolios. And we work with the clients since the design or the planning through the execution of the implementation. As well as I say, for human, veterinary, or devices. And we offer a wide range of support. So it can be from writing manuals or work instructions to training or testing, doing validation of data and migration steps, as well as to the migration activities itself. So from the mapping with the data model and internal data to the cleaning of the data, the enrichment, also related to the ISO IDMP gap analysis. And so if we move now to go back to our agenda, we see that our first topic is the ISO IDMP and the impact on industry. So this is our first start point to understand how ISO IDMP and RIM can be connected, how RIM can help you to be ISO IDMP compliant, and to ease the impact that the implementation of ISO IDMP has on industry as well. So let's move on now with the basic on ISO IDMP and what is that impact that we are talking about on the industry, especially with the current changes that have been happening lately. So to start with, we know that everybody is creating and manipulating data. So industry, agencies, marketing authorization holders, and other organizations. And this data is supposed to serve a purpose. But as there are many stakeholders manipulating and creating data, it tends to be inconsistent, which causes delay, increased cost, process difficulties, and errors. But as we said before, right, this data has to serve a purpose. For example, for pharmacovigilance, data allows ultimately the prevention of adverse effects for public health protection. For falsified medicine directives, it allows identification of false medicines and avoid patients to get false medicines. And for e-prescription, it allows patients getting proper medication, for example, when they're outside the home country. And there are examples like this for many of these activities. So this data has to be used better and it has to be more efficient in order for it to be shareable and to be understandable. And this is exactly what ISO ADMP is looking for, to have standardized data in order to improve all of these processes. And most RIMs, if not all by now, are supporting this standardization and they are following these ISO ADMP data standards. So now, if we move to what these standards are, there are 5 different ISO norms, which goal is to internationally harmonize the specification for the identification of medicinal product. These 5 ISO norms were developed and published by ISO, but also with the input of the ICH, the HL7, and other international stakeholders and experts. If we look at the 5 standards, then we see that there is one for substances, one for control vocabularies, one for units of measurements, one for medicinal product, and one for pharmaceutical product. And all 5 of them were developed to ensure a wide interoperability across global regulatory and healthcare communities. So this is the main goal. So the EMA is implementing those 5 standards, or the ISO IDMP standards, following a project that you may have already heard of, which is called SPOR. And SPOR stands for Substance, Product, Organization, and Referentials. So together, these 4 different services work as a validated database that allows the user to view, to search, to update, to export, and the most important part is to reuse that data. So if we look at this in green, the Substance Management Service, so SMS, or the organization, OMS, the referential RMS, they are already live and working, even if there are still some ongoing work or improvements that have to be done. So the SMS, or the Substance Service, it's made to identify the ingredients, so active substance and excipients, and the materials. The OMS has all the data that comprises organization name and location address, so marketing authorization holders, sponsor, manufacturers, regulatory authorities, etc. And the RMS is a compilation of lists, so a list of lists with control vocabularies that allows to describe the attributes of products, so pharmaceutical forms, dosage units, and things like this. If we look now here, the blue one, which is the product management service, this one was made to identify a medicinal product based on regulated information. And PMS is currently under construction, and we will come back to this topic in a little bit. But what we can see here is that PMS is receiving information, or will receive information, from 2 important databases from the EMA. So now we refer as PMS as to being in construction. And you may already know that PMS will go live with this new e-application form called DADI Web Form for variations in October 2022. The way that PMS is coming live is to support this release of the DADI Web Form. And initially, these SPOR or PMS and DADI were 2 parallel projects, but along the line, or along the way, there has been a lot of changes affecting the scope and the timelines for both. So now PMS will go live at the same time, but only to feed information into DADI Web Form, meaning that the fields from PMS on authorized products will be visible on the DADI Web Form in order to support that human variation activities. But there wouldn't be any submissions for enrichment or corrections available yet to be done to PMS. And as well, there wouldn't be any feedback loop to feed information from that DADI Web Form for the variations into PMS. What is important to keep in mind, and every time we can, we bring it up, is that for now, we have to still keep the submissions to be compliant with Article 57. So we still have to send these messages for XVMPD. Now, something that changed on the scope is that the data in PMS will no longer come from XVMPD and CMED, as was expected before, but it will only come from CMED for the CAPs, so for the centrally authorized products. The EMA has plans to further discuss this and to provide Q&A documentation on this topic. And further updates to the guidelines are expected as well, specifically for the Chapter 7, which is the one related to the migration, or the expected migration that was planned for XVMPD to PMS. So if we look a bit on that change of scope, is that now for October 2022, the DADI Go Live for human variation will be for CAPs only, and the information in PMS will be coming from CMED only. So looking now to these changes in scope, of course, the DADI Web Form will still be the first dive into ISO IDMP for authorized product this year, but only for CAPs. So October 22nd, we have a first release for CAPs only, meaning that PMS will also have only CAP data coming from CMED. And on March 2023, then there is an expected second release that will include the NAPs. That means that PMS at that point will have information for both CAPs and NAPs coming from CMED and XVMPD. Now, it is at this stage on March where the 6 months transition period will start until the use of the DADI web form becomes mandatory for both CAPs and NAPs. And during that transition period, there are some minor releases for bug fixing and other improvements that will have to be done and that are expected. As well, when DADI becomes mandatory, this Q4 2023, this is the timeline where it is expected to start the cleansing and enrichment for PMS. But these topics have had a lot of uncertainty and is still under discussion. So if we take a look now and take a stop and we focus on the impact to stakeholders, we can see that, of course, there is interest that is increasing to be ready for ISO IDMP. There is still some uncertainty on the impact, and this remains from before as well, even though there is more clarity on timelines now, it seems. There is still a clear effort that has to be put to look further from those timelines and those uncertainties and commit for digitalization, because it is digitalization that will help you do best to be compliant with all the upcoming changes related to ISO IDMP. And when you talk about digitalization, then you have to talk about data governance, how the data is created, manipulated, transformed, and what the requirements are. And this data governance is key for a sustainable transition into ISO IDMP and into digitalization. Another part that remains with some clarification needed are the roles and responsibilities, especially on those transition steps. So we will have to keep waiting for more information on those sessions from the EMA. And then one impact, and we refer as this as to the transitional complexity, is that there are multiple processes and multiple databases that are interconnected at once. And they tend to be more during the transition times because you start to use one while the other one is still functioning. So this tends to be very complex, and there has to be a plan on how to mitigate those complexities in those areas. So if we see how this last part, so this complexity will look like in a short overview of a regulatory process, then we will see something like this. So focusing on authorized medicinal products, we see that the first dive into the ISO IDMP will come October of this year with the DADI web form for variations. So the first release, which include the information for CAPs only. So at this stage, also the conditions for PMS are clear. So you will have information in PMS for CAPs only that will be coming from CMED only. So if we look now from a process perspective, then an overview of a regulatory submission for a variation will follow like this. So the industry will start preparing a submission package, ideally with a RIM system, as it has a lot of features to help you prepare and have the data organized in a certain way. And you will compile the ECTD sequence, including that DADI web form. And these are two things that definitely RIMS will help you with. Then you will have your submission sent to the competent authority. And when it goes to the receive the validation, assessment, and decision steps from the competent authority, then of course you have to keep this XVMPD message for now and send it. And currently, this is what we do and we have to keep doing. But in the future, the idea is that the RIM system will support you to produce this FHIR message or to generate this fire message that will be able to be sent to PMS to update the information there. So this is one big expectation, and there has been some improvements on the information given around this, but there is still some more information to be shared. So if we focus again our eyes on ISO IDMP compliance, there are many different scenarios for industry. And it's not only the awareness of the processes or diving into the timelines, the processes, the requirements, but also the navigation on the current scenario for each company. So what is the budget, what is the portfolio, and what is the approach the company would like to take for the transition? There are many options. And the approach can be as minimal as being compliant for the first steps, or as big as to involve a full digitalization of the company that involves different organizations and different teams. I just realized now that you might have been seeing a little camera on the left corner, on the right corner. Okay, so it is important that there is a strategy defined for ISO IDMP compliance, and this is key and depends on three main factors. So these are here. The data, so which are the data that are required by ISO IDMP versus how our data is structured and organized and manipulated. How are the submission process for ISO IDMP and how are our internal process, and as well the technology that is currently used by the company and the technology that is available and that we will have access to, basically. So what is recommended? So these key steps for the implementation, considering the specific circumstances of your company. Sorry, trying to get my laser back. Knowledge of the processes, both internal and the EMA. Define the ISO IDMP applicability, the SPOR data quality assessment, a step on digitalization. So start thinking about how to get to this and what will be the approach for compliance in general. So taking the step to implement a RIM is important, an important process to navigate, especially with the ISO IDMP compliance topic ongoing. So now let's focus a bit more on the other side of the story. So how are the RIMs supporting ISO IDMP? And we will be speaking about RIMs a lot from now on. So let us go to the basics of RIM systems and understand how it is involved with ISO IDMP. So RIMs are regulatory information management systems, and basically they facilitate the collection and storage of data, the organization and classification of data, visualization and sharing, and the communication. So of course, when you have all of these, communication should be easier, and as well, process and activity management will become easier as well. And these are all related to the regulatory fields, so for biological, medicinal, cosmetic, veterinary, and devices. Now, how it can actually facilitate compliance? Well, one important thing is that all of these are complemented with special features for lifecycle management in this case here, but also for ECTD publishing or specific gateways as we've seen for XBMPD and in the future for PMS, and as well now for the production of this or generation of this study web form as well. So one important question for you to ask yourself is how are you currently compliant? And how are RIMs used for compliance with XBMPD? How will they be used in the future for ISO IDMP as well? So you have two options basically now. You use only data entry via the EV web, so ultravigilance using a web trader. This is online data entry, which is a big effort for maintenance, has downtime periods, has session expiration, and also makes their acknowledgement management less efficient. If you have a gateway within your database or RIM, then you're doing the submission through this tool, and you're using internal data, which is most likely already harmonized and is following standard vocabularies, which is a very big advantage. And also, the third acknowledgement management is more efficient. So as IDMP is more data than XBMPD, and it's not only pharmacovigilance, but also regulatory, and many RIMs now have these field maps, then the expectation is that RIMs will have this gateway for ISO IDMP, so to send the information directly to PMS as well. So if we go a bit further on RIMs and how data migration occurs during the RIM implementation, then there are important topics that we should know and understand when you're doing the implementation of a RIM. So first of all, you need to think of your data and how it is structured and who manipulates it. We can think of phase 0, so this here on the left, where you identify the data that you need to migrate. And then some basic information, let's call it that, has to be gathered. So for example, identifying relevant information about products, whether they are complex or not, or estimated preliminary volumes for migration, or providing list of reference for data or list of values. And of course, this is all dependent on which RIM system or database you are implementing as well. So if we take a look now here, these are the steps of the migration of data during an implementation. So you will see that the preparation for the ISO IDMP also occurs during the planning for the migration, so at the very beginning of the steps. And the data mapping, gap analysis are done along the side with the cleaning and the enrichment plan to be also compliant not only for the requirements of that specific RIM data model, but also for the ISO IDMP requirements. So if we see, usually we're working with data extracts from your current database. There is a migration plan that is generated along with a migration protocol. The data mapping is performed in order to identify the data fields from the source system into the RIM that will be implemented. There are some tables that are called loader sheets that can be 30, 50 or more, depending on the data models. And those will be prepared and will basically contain all your information, clean and enrich, and that's what's going to be migrated into the system. So what's important to know that there are usually three main environments. So a test environment, a validation environment, and a production environment. And usually the migration is done to each of those and in that specific order. So first in test, then in validation, and then when no errors are seen and everything is good, then it goes to migration so you can go live. So of course, data preparation for ISO IDMP compliance, it's done at the beginning. And now most of the RIM system have the data fields identified and mapped within their data model. So then this will give you already a step ahead on being compliant to ISO IDMP. And you will see later, we will discuss that you can do this in different ways. So if we focus now on this transition to ISO IDMP, and what is that complexity for the different scenarios of RIMs, then we can divide this complexity sort of like in the stages of the industry or the portfolio size, for example. So if we look at the early stage or the small portfolio scenario, this will be 0 to less than 50 marketing authorizations or investigational medicinal products in different stages of clinical trials and no MA yet available. usually the main challenge that we have seen is that there is not a defined strategy or process that exists for ISO IDMP yet. And there is a low level of urgency as well, because they're still in clinical trial stages. So the first question here is, of course, if there is a RIM system available already or not, and if they will be implementing one. So whether there is a database in place already or not, there are different ways to go about implementing one or being compliant to ISO IDMP. So in case there is a database present and you want to implement a RIM, there are two example cases. So you can do a parallel implementation of a RIM and a transition to ISO IDMP. Or you can do an implementation of the RIM and then think about transitioning to ISO IDMP. So this will be an implementation of RIM with the data that you already have cleaned in order to have your data harmonized into the new system. But then transition to ISO IDMP will mean to enrich the data within the RIM system. You can also have an ISO IDMP transition only, which will be an example of a case tree. So no implementation of a RIM system, but a data enrichment in the current database, including the process improvements in preparation for a future RIM, but also in preparation to the processes that the EMA will be putting in place. So, of course, there are considerations. For example, when this actually become mandatory either for CAPS or for non-CAPS, and what are those timelines as well. So usually these early stage or small portfolio scenario or industries are focused on awareness. So they really want to understand the transition implications and what the possibilities on technology there are, start thinking about a plan, and then they show already some interest in process streamlining and data governance in order to be compliant in the future. So if we move now to the medium-sized portfolio scenario, so this will be something between 50 and 500 MAs. The main challenge here is the high effort on the data collection, cleaning and enriching, especially if no RIM system is available. And that's something very important to keep in mind. So when there is no RIM or not structured database, the data seems to be in a low quality state and requires a lot of cleaning to make sure that all the fields within the new system will be populated correctly and in the best way possible. So as well, you have here a few cases. So whether you have implementation from a database to a RIM, whether you have an ISO IDMP transition only. So for the database to RIM, you have the same two cases. You have a parallel implementation of the RIM system with the transition to ISO IDMP, or you have the implementation of the RIM and then the enrichment to be able to comply to ISO IDMP. And for those with the ISO IDMP transition only, there can be two cases for this medium size. So no implementation, but the data enrichment is done in the current database, including the process improvements, as we saw before, all related as well with the considerations of when they become mandatory. But also a different case, that is when data enrichment is existing in the RIM, including the adaptation of the processes and the system improvements as well. So for this medium portfolio scenario, we have seen that the focus is mainly on the transition requirements, how to implement the RIM system, and how to prepare for ISO IDMP at the same time. So usually the strategy is to do a parallel implementation of a RIM with the transition to ISO IDMP in parallel. And there is a strong interest in the process streamlining and the data governance discussion as well. So now, if we look at the large portfolio scenario, this will be over 500 marketing authorizations. The main challenge is as well the high effort on the data collection, the cleaning and enrichment, especially if there is no RIM system available, and as well a high effort to implement process changes and maintenance. And this is very important because a higher portfolio and a higher or a bigger company means also a lot more employees. So change management is really important in these cases. So, for example, if we look at the two cases here that we saw before, so either they have already a RIM, but they want to implement a RIM, perhaps because their current RIM is not supporting ISO IDMP, for example, then you can do the parallel implementation, including the transition to ISO IDMP, or the implementation of a RIM first, and then implement the enrichment to some degree, because perhaps there is already some information for ISO IDMP in the current system. And as well, from a database to RIM, then as well you have the parallel implementation, or the implementation first and then the transition after. And lastly, the transition only. So that will be case 5. So no implementation, but the data enrichment, including the process improvement. So the same that we have seen before. So one important example, for example, for case 1, so a parallel implementation. We had one case where we did this implementation completion in 12 months. So this involved a full implementation and validation for document management, for publishing, and the RIM system. And this was done for this with more than 1,000 registration, with 60 or around 60 global products and over 90 locations. So now to move on to the closing remarks. If we look at the transition to ISO IDMP and the complexity of different RIM scenarios that we have seen before, what we need to focus now is that ISO IDMP is a big process, and consider RIM seems essential, but also it is important to assess many different things. So when you're considering a RIM, it is important to look at the timelines, the implementation steps and the requirements. What is the current company situation? There is definitely a vendor for every company, so you have to look out and find the best compatible system for you and your company. You have to be aware that you have to define present and future expectation as well, keeping in mind what will come and how things will progress as well with ISO IDMP. You can do in-house versus an implementation partner, and you can consider as well to streamline the internal processes or your internal complexity. So what implementing a RIM offers? Well, it ensures compliance, streamlined processes, defined data governance, internal alignment, and better interoperability. So in the end, you should be then focusing in all of these topics, but also keep in mind that data governance is also very important. So understanding where your data is coming from and who is manipulating is as well as the requirements for ISO IDMP. So you can ensure to be compliant in the future, but also to be ready for the implementation of the RIM if you have not implemented one yet. So I will stop now, but I have the feeling that I skip one slide. So if you give me 1 second and I will go back to it. Okay, never mind. I'm not able to find it, but I will make sure then to include that slide with an explanation when we share the full recording, as well as the question and answers that we will be discussing here. So I stopped to share my screen now, and I think now we have a lot of time actually for a discussion if needed.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Lourdes, for the presentation. It was great. And let's see if someone wants to ask something.
In the meantime, I'll go on mute for a second.
Okay. Remember that you can submit your questions in the chat. So it seems there are no questions. Remember that if you have further questions, you can also send them to info@asphalion.com. Thank you very much, Lourdes, and thank you to all the attendees. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and it was useful. And we will send you the presentation shortly. You're on mute, Lourdes.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And if you have further questions, as Lydia said, just send it to an email and we can make sure to answer those and send them back to you. So thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.